My guest today is Dr. Harry Binswanger. Dr. Binswanger received his PhD in philosophy from Columbia University in 1973 and has taught philosophy at Hunter College, the New School for Social Research, and the University of Texas at Austin. He was a friend and close associate of Ayn Rand's until her death in 1982. His published works include The Biological Basis of Teleological Concepts, the Ayn Rand Lexicon, and the expanded second edition of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Recently, he has produced further work in the philosophy of mathematics. Having been an avid listener to many of Harry's talks over the years, I am thrilled to have him joining me today to discuss a few of my burning questions on the subject of objectivist epistemology. Dr. Harry Binswanger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you specialize in epistemology. I'm going to ask a few of the questions I've wanted to ask you about for a long time now. Let's start with the issue of perception. So what is perception?
Perception is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling with your sense receptors in your skin. It's an automatic form of awareness that's caused by energy from reality entering a sense receptor organ, being processed by the brain, and resulting in an awareness of entities arrayed in space. That is what perception does, that distinguishes it from more primitive forms of awareness, such as a worm might have. If it's aware at all, we really don't know. But some of the worms, like the flatworm, have not just ganglion, but something approaching a brain. A ganglion is better than just one or two neurons. It's a clump of them, but there's something approaching a brain in the planaria. So perception is of distant entities, not things that are pressing against you, although I gave that touch. But really, perceptual touch is when you are feeling an entity and perceiving it as an entity, not just when something presses against you, but when you are actively exploring. I might mention that the best psychologist of perception by far is James J. Gibson. I recommend reading his The Senses as Perceptual Systems and the Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. Those are two books. I didn't know about Gibson's work really until this century began, but I've become an avid advocate of him. Philosophically, what you need to know about perception is that it cannot make a mistake. There's no such thing as a mistake for perception, contrary to the popular views and most of the history of philosophy. But the senses do not tell you anything, so they cannot tell you anything wrong. They give you an awareness in a form dictated by their nature. There's no role of choice except where you direct your attention or your organ of sense. Mm-hmm.
I see. I did want to discuss this issue of perception as inerrant. So on the objectivist account, as you noted, perception cannot be mistaken because it doesn't give you any conceptual knowledge, and only conceptual knowledge can contain errors. So how does the objectivist view of perception differ from past competing accounts, such as that one given by Descartes?
Well, Descartes says that the senses deceive you and you cannot wholly trust them, because once someone has deceived you, you cannot wholly trust them. But there's no little person in your eyes or ears twisting things. There's just the impingement of energy from the environment, and then deterministic automatic processes that result in an awareness. I want to correct something slightly that you said. The issue is not that it's conceptual versus perceptual. That is, you say it cannot make an error because it isn't conceptual. That's sometimes true, but there are conceptual things that cannot be an error. The issue is free will. If you have the ability to change something in awareness, then you need to know that you did it right. Then the right and wrong enter. So it's just like in ethics. The automatic functions of a human person, such as his blood circulation, cannot be morally judged. You judge morally what he's in control of and chooses, because he didn't have to do what he chose to do. He could have done differently. And the same in epistemology. You judge as valid or invalid, true or false, objective or subjective, rational or irrational, proven or unproven, the things that are under your control and didn't have to go the way they did go. But you chose to use a certain method or lack of method. And that's what gives rise to error. So I don't know whether I should concretize the conceptual that's not an error.
We will get to Ayn Rand's theory of concepts. For now, I still wanted to clarify a few things about perception. For example, there are two cases I wanted to ask you about specifically. Suppose a person is, I recently had this experience. Here in Australia, we're known for having a lot of poisonous snakes, venomous snakes. I was recently walking outside and flinched because somewhere in the bottom half of my visual field, I saw what I only realized after the fact must have looked like a snake to me. It was something else, just some piece of rubbish on the floor, on the ground outside. Now, if there's a case of percepts lying to you, that would be an example of it. Now, you would argue, I assume, that there's nothing wrong with my perception there, but I did form an incorrect integration of that data by taking what was not a snake as a snake.
You classified it wrongly, but even that, it's not right to take for epistemological examples things that happen in a split second and are on the periphery of your awareness and involve an automatic reaction, even on the conceptual level. Epistemology is concerned with things that you look at, study, judge, So this is a borderline case, but it presents no problem. I'm not trying to get away from the case. You can handle it by saying there was no error in the senses, which is true. There was an erroneous, hasty conclusion drawn on the basis of a little evidence. But you can't fault yourself for that, you see. What I fault is, let's take an American example. The denial of Biden's growing mental incompetence is not a case of seeing out of the corner of your eye something you think's a snake and quickly say, snake? Oh, and flinching. No, it's a deliberate policy of hiding from the American, or they thought they hid. Everyone who wasn't under the Democrats' leftist haze knew that Biden was declining, but they didn't announce their own recognition of this, and they kept denying it. They kept denying it. So that's an example of subjective, irrational, false, invalid, as opposed to a correct judgment or an objective judgment or a rational judgment, etc. So that's where we're really concerned to make a conclusion in epistemology, not split-second stuff.
All right. Now, what about the blind spot test? So I'll quickly explain this to the audience. In the blind spot test, you take a piece of paper, you put a cross on one part of it, a dot on the other part. You can look it up to find how to do it. And then you close one eye and you look at one of these points and you can see them both. Then you move closer and one of them seems to just disappear. Now, if this seems like a very clear-cut case of your eyes lying to you, if such a thing were possible. And I'd like to ask you why it isn't, because I have observed this dot disappearing. Now, I know it's due to the structure of the nerve. Something in my eye, it has something to do with my visual apparatus. Everybody experiences this. They can try this blind spot test for themselves. But what's interesting about this is that one of the hypotheses put forward to explain this is called the active filling in hypothesis, where your brain is generating a false image of there being whiteness where there is actually a dot. So what is happening then?
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Your senses perform the way they do, and you have to understand the meaning of what they present you with. This gets into my favorite distinction in perception, the form-object distinction. Form is the way you perceive, the object is what you perceive. All forms of perception are valid. All forms of perception are valid. And it's not possible to judge a form of perception because it is not due to volition. A form of conception is due to volition. A form of thinking is due to volition. But whatever your eyes give you, I don't care what it is, the Muller-Lyer illusion of the two things that two lines with arrows, you know them. Or the really neat ones on the web you can look up where you say, I can't believe those two colors are really the same, but if you move them, it doesn't matter what you see. What you see is data. And the conclusions that you draw come from your interpretation of what that means about reality, and that's where it's wrong. The easiest example is seeing a stick in water. You take a pencil, if you put a stick in water, half submerged in a glass of water, it appears to be bent, which means it looks like a bent stick looks out of water. But nothing is whispering in your ear, that's a bent stick. This is the way that a straight stick looks under those conditions, and a photograph of it would show the same thing. A photograph, now that's an interesting question, the filling into the blind spot. Would a photograph with a portion of its lens, no, it works in a different way. You would need a charge-coupled device. And I can't quite predict how it would work. But you were not seeing, you said, the thing disappears. That's an interpretation. You are not seeing something you used to see. Does that mean it disappeared? Or does that mean it crossed the part of your retina where there's no rods and cones? That's an issue of how much you know. There's nothing, you can't say bad eyes, bad retina for having a place where there are no rods and cones, where the artery comes. I think is where it is. It's a blood vessel that is there to supply the retina. You can't judge it. But the form object distinction says it doesn't matter how you see something. It's necessary by physics and physiology. And what you have to do is determine what it means conceptually. For instance, the simplest thing is the bent stick. You learn, hey, that's a sign of straightness that it looks disjointed. When I move around, it seems to do different things, which is your clue. Or when you pull it out of water, it's straight. So that's the way a straight stick looks, half submerged in water. If it were a bent stick, it wouldn't look straight. It would look straight. You could you get the bent or broken stick that would match the difference in the refraction of light, and it would look the way a straight stick looks out of water. But why shouldn't something look the way another thing looks under different conditions? There's no possibility of blaming reality or saying, if I'd made the universe, I wouldn't fill in the blind spot. It's data, and your mind has to interpret it on the basis of more data. So you don't throw anything out. You don't say, oh, no, I didn't stop seeing that. You did. That dot that, quote, disappears. So that's a long answer just to say that the form of perception is not judgeable.
I see.
But the form of thinking sure is. The form of thinking is volitional. The form of conceptual functioning.
Yes, let's move on to that. So Ayn Rand's theory of concepts, could you explain how it differs from Platonic and Aristotelian realism and also nominalism?
It's very different, and it has the advantage of being true, which theirs are not true. Some are better, closer to the truth than others. But let me explain what there is. A concept, speaking sort of commonsensically, is a general idea for all things of a certain kind. The question that philosophers have dealt with for thousands of years and is called the problem of universals is, how can we use one word like animal to mean all the different animals? We call them all animals. An elephant is an animal. A protozoan, a paramecium, is an animal. But even when we don't get to advanced science, a cat isn't like an elephant, it's an animal. A wasp isn't like a cat, it's an animal. It's not a plant, it's an animal in the broad. How can we call all those things by the same word unless there's something in them that's the same animality? And the school that's known as realists think that you can take an animal, stare at him, leave out the characteristics, say, of the elephant. Well, it doesn't have to have a trunk, it doesn't have to have four legs, doesn't have to be huge, it doesn't have to eat what an elephant eats, but there's an animal nature in there. And they're looking for the one identical feature that makes animals animals. But there isn't any. And that's what the opponents of the realists point out. They're called the nominalists. They say, no, elephants are sort of similar to cats, and cats are sort of similar to mice, and mice are sort of similar to birds, and birds are sort of similar to wasps, and there's a family resemblance. No one thing is the same in all the things we call animals. And that's never been answered until Ayn Rand answered it. And her theory is that there is no identical element among the things that we call by a given term, where we say this is a kind of thing, that there isn't one identical attribute in them. There is rather commensurable attributes. They're attributes that can be measured by the same standard. And we differentiate measurements that fall within a certain range and versus measurements outside that range. So, for instance, in if you don't just form animal, you contrast animal with non-animal. What kind of non? Well, plants and grass and trees, and the vegetable realm or the plant kingdom, and they're all alive. They have that in common, which means they act to sustain themselves in the face of entropy, which tends to degrade them, right? So they all sustain themselves by self-generated action. But the action of animals is in place. They move around in place. The higher animals are also conscious, which is a kind of action to deal with the environment. But they all, what makes the whole kingdom, including the paramecia and so forth, one category of things is they move around in space, plants and grass, and they're all rooted. And there's a reason why they move around in space, which has to do with their means of survival, that we don't need to go into that unless you want me to, but
no, it's okay. We can focus on the theory of concepts here. So
I have some slogans that will help concretize or bon mots. The traditional realist theory says that abstraction is subtraction. The way we get to animalities, we say, well, it doesn't have to be big or small. It doesn't have to be gray or red, or it doesn't have to have the one color. It doesn't have to have an estrus cycle. It doesn't have to eat leaves. It doesn't have to. So you throw out everything, and what's left is that which they all share, animality.
That's the form, yes, the Platonic form.
That's the wrong. Yeah, that's if Plato thought it was animality existed in another dimension, but Aristotle thought it was in each thing. Each animal has its animality, and you could define it. And then John Locke was the next one who was better than Aristotle in this regard, but we don't need to get into that. It's not subtraction. It's not an insight. A concept is not an insight into this hidden feature, a universal that is the same in all the concretes. It's relating. It's integrating. It's adding more than subtracting. It's saying, well, all these things are different from those things. There's a differentiation. And you see the things that have the same range of measurement as similar. That's just given. That's just the way, if it's perceptual, it's just, you just see it. For instance, if you have, okay, I don't know if you'd be able to see this, but this is a yellow magic marker, and this is a pencil. And this looks kind of orangey compared to this, right? So if you just consider these two things, the colors are different. But now if I bring in something very different, this is red, if you can see.
We can, I can see.
Yeah. Suddenly, these two things look close compared to this. And that is the mechanism of similarity. Similarity is lesser difference. Similarity is lesser difference. It's still difference. It's the things that you've put under a concept. They're still different, but they're near. there's less difference than the contrasting concretes that you're differentiating from. So as different as an elephant is from a wasp, they look kind of similar when you compare them to a tree.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to summarize how Ayn Rand's theory of concepts differs from the previous accounts of concepts, would this do as a summary, a very short one? Platonic realism holds that forms, the universals, let's say the animality in each animal, exists apart from them in a separate dimension, which is sort of imperfectly projected into this world in some very unclear way. Aristotelian immanent realism holds that there is no such dimension and that the forms exist only in the particulars.
Yes.
That I think you would consider closer to the truth. Though Ayn Rand rejects that any such metaphysical essences exist at all, and she rather sees them as epistemological. They're mental units. And then we have nominalism, which is basically the kind of anti-conceptual approach to concepts, in the sense that concepts are just whatever we sense some vague similarity in and decide to name that way. So it's kind of subjectivism as applied to concept formation. Is that correct?
That's right, but I think the mechanics of it is what really shows the difference. The objectivist theory that is Ayn Rand's is that the thing that is the same about all the things under the concept is the range of measurements. A range of measurements.
Could you explain what a measurement is in this context?
It's a degree. It's a degree on a continuum that a human being establishes. You have to, we call it, or she calls it measurement, because it doesn't exist aside from man. Before human beings evolved, there were no concepts. There was no measurement. Things still were in the relationships they were, but you couldn't talk about measuring them because there was no one to measure, to do the measuring. But when a human consciousness relates things to each other, it says these are close on the scale and this is far. That is the setting up of a range or category of measurements, which is the only thing that the concretes have in common. They don't have all the same measurements. See, that would be the assumption of, say, John Locke, who came later. Well, all white things are white, and you recognize what, but no, they're not white. If you go to the paint store, you say, I want white. Well, which white? We got 18 of them here. And if you think that isn't a minor problem, what about color? What's the one thing that all colors have in common? Red, blue, green, silver. Well, that they're colors. Yeah, but that means you apply a concept to them. What is it? What is it? They are a form of human perception based upon certain physical relationships to the eye and to the optic cortex. And we don't even know all the details about that. But it's there's various forms of energy out in the world, and some of them are auditory energy, the waving of the compression and rarefaction of the air, or some medium. And then there's electromagnetic waves, and we respond to those with vision. So, I've got a great example of form and object. It's not really about concepts, though. We're going on to concepts here.
You can cite your example, and then I'll bring it back to free will, which
Okay.
is the topic.
Bach e Rita, BACH space Y space RITA, was a perceptual psychologist, I think in the 30s. No, he's later than that. But in the last century, maybe in the 60s. And he gave blind people the ability to do something like seeing by mounting a crude video camera, which they were pretty crude in the 1960s, and taking the output of that and taking it to a panel that the person wore on his chest. The panel had 256 pins corresponding to 256 photoreceptors in the video camera. It was all digitized. So according to the light pattern, the pins would press on the chest. And after wearing this for a while, moving around, the image, the excitation would spread as you got closer to something, go away as you got farther, which is one of the most important things in visual perception. People reported that they could see. It was a form of seeing because it was light energy from distant objects that was correlated with the pressure they were, and they no longer felt as a pressure on their chest. They felt, well, now I can see a little. Of course, it didn't have the same qualitative internal experience, but something like that. So that's a great example of how the form of perception can vary, but the object of perception is the same. The ability to navigate through the environment, to, quote, see a spread of things away from you, experiences in depth, is there in the form of pressure on your chest. That was an amazing thing. I don't know why it didn't go any. I guess the video cameras they had then were pretty awful. So that's a form, back to the form object distinction. But the universals, Ayn Rand brought into the realm of science, really, and objectivity by bringing in the concept of measurement, the mathematical concept. So her theory was that concepts are ultimately mathematical. It has to do with a commensurable characteristic. Some things are close together, other things are far away. We experience that as similarity when they're close together. So it's measurement proximity is really what is in common among all the things you classify together is measurement proximity. Now, it's a big subject.
If people want to learn that subject in detail, of course, they should read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, which you edited the expanded second edition to.
Right.
Should we move on to free will? So,
oh boy, okay.
What is the uniquely objectivist perspective on free will?
That free will is the choice to use your mind to try to understand reality or not. The choice to think or not to think. More basically, it's a choice to focus your mind, to turn it on, to try to get full awareness of reality as a policy. That is the proper use of free will. And the worst use of free will is when a person evades. Well, I won't look at that. If I don't know about it, it doesn't exist. What you don't know can't hurt you, And so many, the Biden example that I raised, it's evasion. they would not admit to themselves what they had all the evidence to know, overwhelming evidence to know. And we live in an age of evasion, of people who do not even try to think. Rather, they want to maintain their inner emotional life, and they think that reality threatens it, which maybe it does in the case of their mistakes. The clearest example then on a big scale is religion.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that Jesus loves you if you're a Christian, I mean, it's based on feeling. It's not based upon trying to understand the world.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that there's a God who created the universe out of a non-universe by a wish is bizarre. And everybody thinks that the religion they're not familiar with is bizarre, but they think that theirs is perfectly sensible. I mean, they don't really think that, but they tell themselves that.
This sounds a little bit like Richard Dawkins' the one God further argument. You know, some of us
yes, I know that argument. Richard Dawkins is very weak on religion. You know, he's called himself a cultural Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
no, he's an objectivist. Yeah.
He's weak, very weak. Christopher Hitchens was stronger. But objectivism says on religion, God did not create man, man created God. It's just a figment of people's imagination. It's a primitive belief, and people need a philosophy, and not having a real rational philosophy, people turn to any kind of guidance they can get, but it's bad. It's bad guidance. And religion is a destructive force, hugely destructive. Christianity and Judaism have been somewhat tamed by the Enlightenment, but look at Islam.
Mm.
You want to know why I say religion is a destructive force? Christianity was just as bad as Islam before the Renaissance and before the Age of Reason. So it's been tamed, and people think, oh, it's all Christianity is not like Islam. Yes, it is. It's just pulled in its horns because there's been science and technology and progress and the works of Aristotle and his followers.
Okay. Circling back to volition. So on the objectivist view, volition is always involved in concept formation. Now, I asked you about this in class.
No.
Sorry,
no.
is that okay?
It's not always involved. It's involved once you get past the first level. But there's
so
really no
table to furniture, then
I mean, no child fails to get dog.
Right. That's what I was asking you about in class once. I asked, does a child have to choose to form a concept like table? I wasn't really clear on your answer then.
No, there's an element of choice in this way.
Mm-hmm.
A child is on the premise of, I want to know, I want to understand, I'm using my mind, will get the concept quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so simple that even the lazy child will get it within a pretty short time. So it's the higher, I guess I should explain, concepts are built upon earlier concepts.
Mm-hmm.
The first concepts are built upon what you perceive with your sense organs. Mm-hmm. But once you've got those concepts, you can find relationships among them. So you don't form animal as your first concept, but dog and elephant, those things are pretty easy to conceptualize. It doesn't take any real effort But when you get to animal or organism, it does take an effort, and people have half-baked concepts above the concepts of the first level. So they are pretty clear on what a dog is. They're not so clear on what an animal is. For instance, do they know that sponges are animals and yeast is an animal? Now, part of that is just, advanced knowledge. And when you get to life, they're completely unclear of what life is. And then when you get the concepts that depend upon life, such as death, they talk about life after death, as if that made any sense.
Or value apart from life.
Value is a good example. Yeah.
Now, that is actually an example of what I'd like to ask about next, which is the stolen concept fallacy, which was discovered by Ayn Rand. Could you explain what the stolen concept fallacy? I've been really fascinated by this recently. I've started noticing it everywhere.
Yeah, in intellectual circles, especially philosophy, it's very common. The stolen concept is taking away a concept from its roots. So you're taking it as without a logical right. That's why it's called stolen. You're taking it and trying to use it in a way that makes no sense. For instance, the Constitution. I don't know if Australia has a written constitution. Does it have a written constitution?
I believe we do have one, but it's not as serious as yours. Let's say.
Oh, okay. So the American Constitution, if I said the Constitution is illegal, the concept of illegal rests on the concept of law, and the concept of the Constitution is of the ultimate law. So it makes no sense to say a constitution is illegal or the universe is expanding. That's a harder one. Expanding into what?
Yeah.
There's the universe is everything. It's not just the stars. It's perfectly all right to say the stars, the matter that we can detect is expanding, but then something else is coming in, the dark matter or something else. You can't expand everything. Oh, that was another example that a philosopher raised, kind of sensing this issue. Suppose someone said everything doubled in size last night while we were sleeping. Everything doubled in size, including the rulers, everything doubled in size. There's no such thing. Doubled in relation to what?
Yep.
So doubling depends, as a concept, depends on that which is single. It's two of the things that are single. And if everything is doubled, there is no reference for the doubling. So
just in the universe example, though, isn't it possible for the we observe redshift, so isn't it possible for the distances between everything to keep increasing?
No, that's stars. It's possible that the distance, but there's no contradiction saying the stars are all moving apart.
Yes, but if everything in the universe is moving further and further apart from everything else, that's, I think, what is meant by the idea that the universe is expanding.
Contradiction. That's a stolen concept. It makes no sense. You can't grasp that idea if you look at what apart means. Then there has to be, if two things separate, it has to be that something else is between them, and that doesn't separate. How would you, if you imagine you got two things with a void in between, right? How would you detect the void in between as opposed to seeing them as together? There's no possibility of things getting further apart if there's no scale, which doesn't get further apart.
Okay, that's interesting, but I would like to focus on the stolen concept fallacy. So,
well, that is a stolen concept.
Okay,
but,
I see.
But let's take a more sexy one, more practical one. Proudhon said property is theft. Property is theft. But theft is a concept that depends on the idea of property. Theft is taking away property from the person who owns it, using the property of others without right. It's mine and you take it. That's theft. But if property itself is theft, then what does theft mean?
Yep.
You lose the concept. So like saying everything is indoors. What is indoors? Where are the doors? Yeah. What's on the other side of the doors? It can't be that everything is indoors. The doors are not indoors, and what's outdoors is not indoors. So all these things take a derivative concept. Let's take another made-up one. A derivative concept, use it in a way that attacks its own prior concepts that give it meaning. So it takes away a concept from its earlier concepts that connect it to reality. It uses a concept in a way that turns it into a sound rather than a concept. Suppose they say money is counterfeit. To be money is to be counterfeit. Or every document is a copy. There was no original. Everything is a copy. Now, where does that lead us?
A copy of what?
Huh?
A copy of what?
Copy of a copy. There's a big time cashing in on that example. It's like saying everything is in the mind. What Ayn Rand called the primacy of consciousness, the false view, the incoherent view. Maybe we're all only in our own minds and we cannot perceive reality. Well, what's your mind? Your mind is your consciousness, your awareness of what? Of itself. No, you can't be copying a copy all the time. There has to be an original to copy. You can't be aware of your awareness of your awareness of your awareness. There has to be the awareness of something, not just of the awareness. And that refutes religion and Immanuel Kant, the big gun of all the wrong philosophies of the last 250 years. It refutes Descartes. Descartes started explicitly with, I don't know, how do I know that I have hands, that I have a body? I have certain sensory experience, but I've been deceived. So if I'm going to doubt everything that's even possibly doubtable, I can't know that there's anything other than I think, therefore I am. But is there a world? I don't know yet. All I know is I know I am conscious, but I don't know that there's anything to be conscious of. That's stealing the concept of consciousness.
One particular stolen concept that I find very interesting is the stealing of value from life. And I think that, do you think that
turn to that? Yeah,
taking value apart from life is the kind of epistemological error inherent in all philosophies of altruism?
Yes. Altruism is the philosophy that says morality kicks in when you sacrifice yourself to help another person. And it's riddled with contradictions, but the granddaddy contradiction of them all is that you could not even form the concept good if it always meant that which hurts you and helps someone else. You couldn't form the concept. It's like, the neighborhood concept, bad. He's bad, as a compliment, right? He's bad. She's bad. That is what bad would mean. Bad would mean good. If you gave a young child ice cream and said, "Now, how do you like it?" "I like it." "Yeah, it's bad." And then you gave him some Spam. Yeah, that's good. He would learn the words good and bad to mean the opposite of what we mean them. So you learn on the basis of egoism, of self-interest, of your pleasure and your pain. You learn good and bad. And then years later, somebody comes along and says, no, what's really good is to hurt yourself. If it helps.
They're also committing a package deal fallacy there as well, because they are relying on your positive association with the word good and everything it suggests to undercut the very base of the very basis on which you form that concept.
Well, that's what makes it a stolen concept. The package deal is the way they is another objectivist term, the way they treat selfishness. So the opposite of altruism is egoism, selfishness. And people regard selfishness as taking more than you deserve to harm others, or stealing and predating on others, destroying others for the sake of your benefit. Well, you can't destroy others for the sake of your benefit. That's not in your interest. But what about the people who are selfish and do not destroy other people, like Steve Jobs or Thomas Edison or Ayn Rand or me? I function on the basis of my self-interest is the only standard of my actions. And I value other people, because the same reason, people say, well, if you were selfish, you would go after and try and manipulate and destroy them. What about pets? Do you take that? I got a dog. Oh, good. I got something I can torture. No, people love their pets. I have cats right now. I'm looking for a dog. But to be selfish is to value other organisms like yourself and other people like yourself, not to view them as things you can destroy, but things you can get great value from, like someone you love or your friends. But even the corner grocer, is a source of value to you as long as he respects your rights and does not try to sacrifice you to him. So the package deal is they put together the independent man with the criminal, with the predator. But those are opposite. So to put together into one category things that are opposite is what Ayn Rand calls a package deal.
Yes, that would be like putting Peter Keating and Howard Rourke in the same category and calling them both selfish.
Yes.
When in fact they are opposites.
Yes.
Now, all right, I wasn't going to ask you about this, but I think it might be a good idea now. Why is it not in a person's self-interest to sacrifice others to themselves?
Because then he would grant them the right to sacrifice him to them. But, more fundamentally, there's nothing to be gained by making another person mindless. And that's what you do if you sacrifice them, you thwart their minds. So suppose who's the...
Gail Wynand is a good example of this.
Well, that's fictional character. I want the standard one is Thomas Edison or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos
Oh, okay.
or Warren Buffett. You know,
Mhm.
people who create value. Would you want to steal from them so they couldn't provide value to you anymore?
Mhm.
Aside from the fact that how they are going to treat you and how everybody else is going to treat you, value in life comes from creating and earning, not from grabbing.
Mhm.
Value is not, it's not like who gets the most slices of pie.
Mhm.
It's who has the most fulfilling creative accomplishments that he's proud of and wants to share with other people. Not the proceeds necessarily, but the enjoyment of it. You want to find other people who love what you love.
Mhm.
And a policy of, I mean, look at a marriage. This is like the ultimate. In a marriage, would a great marriage be, oh, now I got a chance to really hurt someone. Wow. Well, I'm going to be selfish. But no, I should be unselfish. So I'm not going to hurt her. I'm not going to make her hate me
Mhm.
just because I don't want to be selfish. No, it's selfish is to share values with someone. I mean, it's really a degraded, the altruist religious ethics is a degraded view of people that no one really accepts when they think about.
Mhm.
You know, Spinoza said there's nothing more valuable to a man than another man who lives by reason.
Well,
So,
that's a great quote. Oh.
yeah, on their view, Crusoe's in the island
Mhm.
and Friday comes
Mhm.
and he thinks, oh, good, here's a person I can kill or torture or burn his hut down if I can find a hut. No, well, thank God there's another human being I can talk to, I can work with, can help me build things, help us get rescued. Anybody would feel that.
Mm.
It's just not true that man is the enemy to man.
Mhm.
Man is naturally different. Now, if the person's irrational, if Friday is a homicidal maniac, okay, but
Mhm.
most people aren't.
Yep. So that's the idea that there are no conflicts of interest between rational individuals. Emphasis on
That's
the
one.
rational.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and that's your
Uh,
free will.
mhm, mhm. Yes. So man must be man by choice, to quote Ayn Rand. So I heard you produced a short video in which you critiqued evolutionary psychology. And that's something I've found quite interesting lately. It's something that's being discussed in sort of popular podcasts and literature. I'm very skeptical about the ideas in evolutionary psychology. It seems like almost a contradiction, even the title.
Yeah, it is
Uh,
a contradiction.
yeah. So, could you explain what you think of evolutionary psychology and why?
It's determinist.
Mhm.
Now, be aware that I am a tremendous fan of evolution.
Mhm.
My doctoral thesis was applying evolution by natural selection to solve a philosophical problem about goal-directed action.
Mhm.
So I think Darwin was a giant. I think Darwinism is right, but it does not apply where there is free will, which is man's choice to think or not to think. And that's what creates his psychology. So, you know, the parody of it is they find a gene for everything, right? So Oh, you like computers? You got a gene for computers, or you got a gene for technology. And the parody is there must be a gene for finding a gene for everything.
Okay.
Because so man
But the thing is,
psychology.
they would actually accept that. They would say, yes, I
Yeah,
must have some genetic
that's right.
predisposition to enjoy data analysis or something.
Yeah, but what they can't accept is every conclusion that I draw is shaped by forces beyond my control, having to do with, I'm claiming natural selection and evolution, but maybe that's just an illusion forced upon me by something I don't know. So first you have to decide whether you have free will. If you don't have free will, every belief you have is a prejudice. Every belief is forced upon you by something that runs your mind. That's what determinism holds. If you are free, if you control your own thinking, then evolution doesn't enter. It's your choice.
Mhm.
I mean, evolution enters in the sense that we all have the same pleasure-pain mechanism. You know, everybody feels pain if you stab them with a knife. Everybody likes warm temperature, comfortable temperature, doesn't like to be cold. Everybody likes feeling, how far can I go with this? I think there are foods that everybody would find distasteful.
Mhm.
I think everybody probably is built to find the smell of baked bread very nice.
Mhm.
And everyone is built to find the smell of rotten eggs, hydrogen sulfide really, as repulsive. So
That is all evolved, but what is not evolved is
value.
like higher level value. Well,
Yeah.
wait a second, but if you enjoy the smell of baked bread, and that is something you just
Well, let me
enjoy.
qualify.
Yeah.
Conceptual chosen values are
Okay.
not.
So where do we draw the line between what we've evolved to like or dislike and what we've chosen to like or dislike?
What we know we've chosen, you know, but it's not just, you know, I chose to be a philosopher. And it was between philosophy and neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose philosophy. But it's not just that kind of thing. Let me tell you the story of Mickey Mantle, famous baseball player. The Australians may not know him, but he was in the 50s. He was the star player in the world in baseball. When his mother brought him back from the hospital at birth, you know, the mother giving birth brought him home. His father put a baseball into the crib.
Mm-hmm.
So baseball was part of his life from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he developed a value by playing baseball and getting better and better at it. He began to identify himself with baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is the choice. He didn't have to work on it and become good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for instance, first time I was given a basketball, and I tried to dribble it and I couldn't. I said, "To hell with basketball."
Right.
You know, and I dislike it to this day.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an element of choice about, do you pursue this and build competence in it, which is pleasurable, or do you decide that's not for me? I'm not going to do this. That's where the choice lies ultimately for your career values and your early values that stay with you. So it's about the choice to think or not to think, to to try to, how do I dribble? Now, nobody told me you can learn to dribble. I kind of assumed I'm not good. I can't do this. Other people do it. I see this guy next to me can dribble. I can't do it. I just haven't got it. Now that's a mistake. No, I didn't know enough about, I was, maybe 8. I didn't know enough about psychology or skills or anything to realize if I'd wanted to, I could have learned to play basketball pretty well. Not, like somebody who's 7 foot high, but
well, I'm glad you chose philosophy and not basketball as your career.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You will have retired.
But I have a lot of other interests. Like now I'm taking up bowling and I'm very bad at it. Very bad. But I know I can get better, which I didn't know about basketball.
You mean 10-pin bowling or lawn bowling?
Yeah.
10-pin bowling.
No, 10-pin bowling in an alley. Yes. Okay. I just started working on that about 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
And it's hard. It's hard.
Well, I will see you at Ocon, and maybe if we find time, we can play a game of bowling. All right. So let's see. At the end of her life, toward the end of her life, Ayn Rand was working on abstracting principles from mathematics to develop epistemology further. So what were her thoughts on that, and how far did she get, and what needs to be done?
Well, she wanted to begin. She thought there was great strides to be made in integrating math and epistemology. But she decided, I won't go there until I'm 70. And when she was about 70, she decided to take, more like 72, she decided to take math tutoring from a high school math teacher whom she knew. But she only got, I don't know, maybe 5 lessons. And they started at the beginning. They started at the very beginning of algebra. So she did not have any great discoveries or even get to the point where she thought she could, because she died at 77, just not long after her 77th birthday. And she was busy trying to get Atlas Shrugged filmed, which was much more important than her learning mathematics. So it never went anywhere. And that's not what I'm doing. In my work on the philosophy of math, I'm working to reform math, to give it a proper philosophic base, free from Plato.
Yep.
Because the one refuge of Plato in the world is mathematicians. So many of them are Platonists. And I think they misconceptualize the foundations of the science, of the discipline. Wow. That's a big one. It depends on who they are and what they mean. Do they want to go on in philosophy, or are they, do you mean someone in a class?
An 18-year-old who has just finished high school. They're going into philosophy. They may have heard about objectivism. And if they have the education that I had in philosophy, they're going to be exposed to a lot of really false ideas.
Yeah.
What can they do to equip themselves to get the most out of that education without having it corrupt them?
Let me take it from that standpoint, that what can you do in college to get the most out of what's going to be a bad philosophical education? And I have some advice based upon my teaching in college. One is if you're dealing with the history, you have to separate the history of philosophy, courses in the history of philosophy, which can be good, from courses dealing with what they call problems. For instance, does man have free will?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just talk about pro and con, but usually it's more, they try to be more, quote, relevant than that. So they'll have, what is mental competence and did Biden have it? How would we determine that? Should immigration be open or not? And they'll try and take it down to more fundamental philosophical questions. But those are problem courses. If you're dealing with the history of philosophy, my advice is start with the simplest, babyish, encyclopedia type, not Wikipedia, but the old-fashioned encyclopedia's description of a philosopher. So get the shortest, most simplistic, as they would call it, a description of, say, Plato that you can find. Then go to a little more advanced source. Do not start with Wikipedia, or be careful if you do. It can be too technical. Mm-hmm. People who write for Wikipedia are sometimes trying to impress you. Mm-hmm. So they make it more complicated than it is.
They really impress me.
Yeah. So in the history of philosophy, start with the simple and only later get to the original texts. Mm-hmm. There's only I think it's two philosophers who write in a way, maybe three, that you can read. Mm-hmm. Descartes, Plato, mm-hmm. and Locke, sort of. He's bad stylistically. But Aristotle, you cannot read. I mean, you can read it, but it's going to be a slog. Aristotle's hard, except for his ethics, which is worth reading.
Oh, that's very readable.
It's not Aristotle's fault, by the way. It's the fault that what we seem to have as student notes collated and put together, or perhaps Aristotle's own notes for his lectures, and they are, it's not written out stuff that was meant to be read. So it's very hard to follow. And German philosophy is much worse, much worse. So start easy and get more complicated as you get familiar with the easy stuff. That would be first level. Now, how to protect yourself from falling for the stuff that you're being taught. I would say read Ayn Rand's essay For the New Intellectual, which she covers the whole history of philosophy, which pretty much takes care of all the errors in about 6 pages. Mm-hmm. Brilliant, unbelievably deep. Now, advice for writing papers. The purpose of a paper is not to convince your professor of your views. They will tell you, write what you think. What is your view of X? Write a paper on your view of X. They don't want your view of X. Rationally, they don't want your view of X. They want to know, what do you know about the various views, various positions you can take on X, and how to argue among them. Mm-hmm. So what you do is your paper should be reports of what other people have argued, giving attribution to them. Well, Smathers argues that rights cannot be defended because of blah, 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 but then Williams answers him, and in the end you say, I'm not sure what I think, or I tend to agree more with Williams, or I tend to agree more with, but don't be straight ahead and honest with them about it. because they're not interested in that, and you'll just alienate them. Now, why should a professor who spent his life, and he's now 55 years old, dealing with this subject of, say, rights or altruism and ego, why should he be interested in what some 19-year-old thinks who's just come into the subject? They tell you that to give you a motive to write the paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's not they're being dishonest. They're trying to say, hey, look, you should state what you think. But they really want to know that you know the field, you know the various positions that have been taken, and they're not particularly interested at all in what you come down on, what you think is the right answer in the end. So that's it for writing papers. Protection is the only way to protect yourself, really, is to read better philosophy, which is Ayn Rand and the Objectivist school. There are good histories of philosophy that raise some good criticisms of wrong views, but, well, I can say this. Assume, and I mean this quite literally, every term that you learn, assume it's false. Assume it's invalid, because that's the right way to do it for anybody in any situation. But there's going to be a very high percentage of invalid terms in philosophy, because the field is beyond corrupt. It's non-existent. I mean, there is no philosophical theories that anyone can defend. It's all negative. I'll shoot down what you say. They don't have any theories. But in the history of philosophy, you can learn something. You learn how your views are different from other people's. And that's what, remember I said, you form a concept, you need different, and similar is lesser difference. So you need to contrast your views and your thinking with other people's to get clear on what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tremendous opportunity. But don't, all right, I'll give you one kind of silly but very helpful piece of advice. When you're deciding, if you're in college, you're deciding what philosophy courses to take. I want to take a course in philosophy. There's 16 courses. I wonder what I should take. Go to the departmental secretary. He was not a philosopher. He was just a man or a woman who's doing clerical work there. But that person will know who is the good teacher and who isn't. And the course description means nothing. It's all about who is a good teacher and who isn't. Even if he's teaching wrong ideas, some are clear, entertaining, stimulating, interesting, and interested in arguing with you. Others are the opposite. So find out. Don't pick your course by what it says in the catalog. Pick your course by whom the departmental secretary says, oh, everybody loves his classes. With the proviso that maybe they love him because he appeals to their prejudices. You have to watch out for that. You know, maybe he's a Marxist and all the little Marxists like him. You know, because he's constantly insulting the rich. So with that proviso, but you want someone who really stimulates thinking in the class, is not boring, and is a good teacher.
Yep, definitely very good advice. Having a great teacher is probably the most important thing in learning. All right, do we have time for you to tell us how to save the world, or should we leave that for another time?
nobody can save the world single-handedly. Nobody can set out to do that. But how can you improve the world? How can you make the world a little bit better? If you want to do that, take very seriously that you may be better off learning how to play guitar really well and letting the world go to hell. There's no missionary's role for people. But for instance, I love to argue with people.
Me too.
And, I went into that, I guess originally I did want to save the world, but after 60 years, 63 years, I realized it's going to take a long time of a lot of people's efforts. So make sure your motivation is selfish and realistic.
But supposing it is, as it is in my case, suppose I would be a philosopher regardless.
Then if you're able to get a hearing from, well, I don't know. I was going to say something I'm not sure is true. You don't want to do that. I was going to say, if you can influence the current intellectuals by argument, but I don't think, I've never been able to do that. I've had a lot of interaction with intellectuals and never been able to budge them. So the first thing to do is to get super clear on the truth by studying objectivist work. And I'm giving a lecture here in Naples, Florida, where I live, on Ayn Rand's birthday in February, how to study Ayn Rand's writings. If you can come to Naples for that, that would be a good thing to do.
I would love to. It would depend on funding and my schedule, but we'll see. We'll see. I will see you at Ocon, though.
I'm just going to be there for one day this time.
Oh, which day?
The opening banquet and the next day.
The first and the second. Okay. All right. Well,
yeah,
the
first and the second. Well said. Yes.
Yes. Okay. And to finish off with a quote from We the Living, Victor, one of the villains, says to Kira, "You won't get far with those ideas of yours, citizen." And she replies, "That depends on the direction I want to go." So, Dr. Harry Binswanger, thank you very much for your time today and for joining me on my podcast. It's been a pleasure.
For me too. Thank you, Maxim.
Thank you.